Martha, we got James on the line. What do you want to ask him?
Well, James, you touched upon this a little bit, and you talked about how when there's challenges, there's opportunities. You've been through 2008, you've been through COVID, and now we're into this unprecedented time. Instead of a prescription for what you did in each time, how do we think about these kinds of things as they come upon us?
I am lucky now that I've seen some of these cycles, and I just talked about some of the mentorship that I had. So at the time, I had never seen anything like 2008, 2009, the great financial crisis. But the founders of my company were around back in the RTC days, 1991, 92, savings and loan crisis. I mean, those were really, really tough years. I think it is important to always have that glasses half full mindset where things are challenging, but those times are really times when you can rebuild, create that foundation, and come out of them stronger.
I'm Brian Briscoe, host of the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. And this podcast is different than everything else out there. I bring together a new and an experienced investor on each episode, and I let the aspiring investor ask the questions that they need answered. So if you're an aspiring investor yourself, you probably will have the exact same questions. Now, before we get to this episode, make sure you hit the subscribe button below and that little bell to make sure you get notified every time we post a new episode. And now, enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe. I'm really excited for today's show. It's one of our Ask the Expert episodes today. We got two great people on the line with us today. We got James Nelson and we got Martha Sandino. And interestingly enough, this is the first time one of the aspiring investors has said, "Can I come back on the show?" And so if you've been listening to the show recently, you've seen Martha, on within the last month. So happy to welcome you guys both to the show and you back again, Martha. So James, Martha, welcome.
Great to be here.
Thanks. And James, as our custom is, you're up first. So let's chat a little bit. Do us a favor, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Perfect. So James Nelson, I'm based here in New York. I'm 25 years in the business. So right out of school, graduated from Colgate in 1998. Didn't even know real estate was a thing, and fortunately found a job posting to become a broker in New York City. I later found out there was only two people who applied for the position, and I was their second choice. So I always joke with my founders there. But yeah, throughout my career, I've been an investment sale broker here in New York. In addition to multifamily, we sell office, retail, land, but I've done a lot in the multifamily space. Very early on in my career, I realized the opportunity to invest and not just broker and be on the sidelines. And so the bulk of my investing over my career has been on the limited partner side, where I invest with clients. I should probably say that when you're a broker and you're also investing, it's very important to do it in the right way. Yeah. You want to really be careful of the conflict. So I would never invest in a deal that I am selling that is a clear conflict. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes I'm investing with clients, maybe they bought through another broker, but just to point that out. So I have invested as an LP dozens of times. I'm also a general partner for apartment buildings in New York. But then, really the bulk of my investment activity has been as a general partner in a real estate fund, where over two funds, we raised $50 million in equity to go out and invest in close to 36 deals with a total capitalization of $350 million. So we did that as JV equity. Many of those investments were multifamily, mixed-use retail, apartments above. But again, I felt more comfortable in that role where there's a lot of great operator sponsors who run real estate deals, and we were able to bring equity to the table. So that's kind of my story today. And I started that first company that I was at was Massey Knakal, was there for 17 years, ended up becoming a partner. We sold it to Cushman and Wakefield, one of the biggest global firms out there. Yep. My team was the top investment sale team in the US back in 2016. And after that, came over to Avison Young, which is a Canadian company that now has 120 offices around the world to build out the investment sales team here in New York. So I have 36 people in the group. And that's what I've been up to. And maybe we'll get a little later to kind of what I'm up to now with my own podcast and a book that I'm working on.
Yeah. We're selling a property with them, and we've bought with Cushman & Wake, brokering transactions before, and both really, really solid firms. But congratulations on being there, top office. And I know it's been a while, but that's a big deal because they're nationwide. So talked about your fund and how you guys raised a lot of money for their deals. What's coming in as equity partners? What was your criteria for were investing in deals, and how would you go find the right deals?
What I noticed in my brokerage career, and what I should also say is that, and this really started at the first company I was at, we really focused on small to mid-sized deals. And in New York City, it's hard to say that a $20, $30 million deal is small, but small to middle market is really considered $50 million and below. And then more institutional type sales are usually at 50 million plus. So what was always really interesting to me was that 95% of the sales in New York City were under $50 million. And yet almost all the institutional equity and appetite was going after the $50 million plus deals, right? So all the organized capital was going for the larger deals. So I said, in most of these small to mid-sized deals, the way that the operators and sponsors raise money are from friends and family, right? They go out and they pass the hat, or they try to bring in investors. So I said, what if we were to institutionalize equity for these small to mid-sized groups? So we went out and we raised money from our own high net worth individuals, right? And what we wanted to focus on was to provide equity checks of $3 to $7 million. That was our sweet spot. And what we found out was it's actually tougher for a sponsor to raise $3 million than maybe it is to raise $30 million, right? That was the space that we were in, had an incredible partnership with River Oak NYC 1 and NYC 2, had an experienced fund manager who not only helped us raise the money, but to help asset manage. Now, Brian, as far as your question about how to find the opportunities, that's where the clients and sponsors came into play. And I found that when we had the equity, right, the deal sourcing was almost the easy place, right? Because again, the fact that most of these sponsors used to pass the hat and raising equity was the toughest part for them. There was never a shortage of operators coming and say, hey, I've got this great investment opportunity. I've got it tied up. I'm looking for $3 million. Are you interested? So in that regard, the operators, the sponsors were bringing us the deals.
Yeah. And I launched my fund about 6 months ago, and I probably had 5 different deals cross my desk so far. It's Monday so far this week. That is something that I've found to be true is, people are always looking for money. And if you've got money to plug into deals, it's going to make a lot of sense. For most operators, raising that 3 to 7 million is more difficult than 30. Why would you say that?
The organized capital, right? The institutions of the world, for them, $3 to $7 million, that doesn't even move the needle,
Too
right?
small.
I mean, you've got the Blackstones of the world that are, their funds are billions of dollars, right? And for them, it's the same amount of due diligence and effort to write a $3 million check as it is to write a $30 or a $300 million check, right? So that's why they say, well, look, we'd rather focus on the larger opportunities. Again, there's more institutional type sponsorship, right? There's a lot of diligence that goes into that. And so that's where most of the organized capital is. But again, if you want that small to mid-sized deal, most of those sponsors, they don't have the track record yet that the institutional funds are going to require.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to your point, if you're raising $3 million, you're doing that in $50,000 chunks or $100,000 chunks, which ends up being a whole lot of people to get to that point. But once you cross a certain threshold and you can find the institutions, there's a lot of like private equity firms whose minimum check size is like 5 million or 8 million or $10 million. But once you cross that threshold, raising large numbers tends to get easier. You have to have the experience though. So what were some of the challenges you had? I mean, I know you were working in the industry, you were a broker. What were some of the challenges you had kind of flipping the switch and raising capital?
It's a different conversation. And at first, I mean, I haven't met anyone yet who said they actually enjoy raising capital and asking the question, right? And it is when, you're going to a friend or a family or a business colleague, it's a different proposition. What I will say though, is over time, it does get easier. The more that you do it, it's just part of the process. And I think you also have to understand that there's a lot of investors out there who want access to great deal flow. If you're not going to offer it up to them, they're going to go somewhere else. And if you really believe in what you're offering, you should be happy to share about it. So, but I think that initial ask, also kind of the follow through. I mean, if it's a $250,000 check, $50,000 check, $2.5 million check, I mean, sometimes those smaller checks are the toughest to track down and, hey, do you have any more questions? Did you look at the subscription agreement? It's a process. So I think some of the just kind of block and tackling to kind of get to that first close it's a lot of work. The fun stuff is once you have the discretionary capital, I mean, that's the holy grail. And that's why sponsors love to come to us, because they said, okay, you've got an investment committee with 5 people. You can get back to me in 24 hours. You can fund in 30 days. Once we were, we'd raised capital, we were off to the races.
Yeah, I think anything in this business is reputational. Once you have the reputation for being able to do something, whether it's closing on a property or raising capital, you end up getting a lot of people, a lot of attention, and a lot of deals coming your way. Now, about the fund, do you invest nationwide, or is it just New York?
No, we just focused in New York City. And one of the things that I talk about in my book that's coming out is the importance of specializing, both in geography and asset class. And yes, I know there's investors out there who have been able to invest in multi-markets, but then they need to do the work in each city to really learn the market. And I can tell you, I mean, New York City is a massive, massive market. The 10-year average is over $30 billion of sales. There's plenty to do. And we're not just talking Manhattan, we're talking Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, even Staten Island. And so there is plenty to do. Once I started going outside, yes, can I understand the fundamentals? Sure. But do I really, part of the reason why we could make such a quick decision is because we knew values, we knew the rules of the game. It's a very technical market here. So very important to be able to specialize.
Yeah, and I love it. And I had that epiphany myself. I was kind of shotgunned across the nation for a while. And I don't know how I ended up at this dinner, but I was in a room around a table with 5 or 6 guys that had thousands and thousands of units and extremely successful in this business. And that's one thing I walked away from that dinner, because we were talking to all these guys, and the detailed information they had on their markets, they weren't scattered. Everyone around that table had one market that they were into, and just listening to them talk and figuring out, what led to their success. I think focus is one of the things that I wish I would have done a lot sooner. I thought focusing to one state was great, but, focusing on one market, is even better in my opinion. But now you mentioned a book and you mentioned a podcast. Let's chat about that for a second. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Sure. So my podcast and the book, they're both named The Insider's Edge to Real Estate Investing. I started the podcast a little over 2 years ago. So right after COVID, when we're all sitting at home, wondering what to do, I found that the podcast was a way that I could interview investors, hear what they were doing. People had a lot of free time on their hands. So after a year and all the lessons that I had learned, not only from my podcast, but my own personal experience, and also as a broker, as an investor, I've seen hundreds of investment opportunities. As a broker, I've seen thousands and thousands. And I've also seen what works and what doesn't work. And so that prompted the book, The Insider's Edge to Real Estate Investing. It's coming out in January. McGraw-Hill is publishing it, so I'm really excited. It should be a really, hopefully, a big distribution. The reason why it's called The Insider's Edge is I really do believe that you can gain the inside edge in real estate investing to outperform the market. And a lot of what I talk about in the book of why real estate is so much more attractive, at least to me, than investing in the stock market is you can go to anyone can go and figure out what a stock is trading for at any time of the day, right? Whereas real estate, there's a lot of inefficiencies. Sometimes you can find deals that are off market. You find properties that aren't properly marketed, and there's opportunities out there. And I think you also have the control, the power to reposition the asset, creativity to add on it. Whereas if you just invest in the stock market, again, you're just passive. For all those reasons, I wanted to put this into a book, not only for aspiring investors, but for veterans who've been doing this for a long time. So I'm really hoping that anyone reading is going to get a lot out of this. And it's really a how-to from start to finish.
And you're saying the book comes out in January?
Yes, end of January.
All right, awesome. So we'll put a link to that into the show
Thank
notes.
you.
I just Googled it and it looks like it's already on Amazon. So
Yes.
yeah, there we go. January 31st. Right after I asked the question, the website popped up. Hardcover, January 31st, Kindle edition. So everybody interested, check it out. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for anybody there. So, and I love the idea. I mean, you've been doing the podcast, and the podcast turns into a book. If I had aspirations of writing a book, I would have plenty of material from 2 years worth of podcasting. Maybe I'll start now.
I will say that I did get a lot of help on it. So for one, I had a writing partner. Okay. And so a lot of what we do and when we're busy is, yes, I've got the podcast, but this book really came out of a 12-part series where my writing partner interviewed me. After each episode, she would then write up the chapter, I'd edit it and work on it. So yes, if it was just me writing a 272-page book, it might take 20 years to deliver it. So, there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of talented people. So it is possible.
I was listening to somebody speak, and he's written several books, and his strategy for writing books is he does presentations, but he says about third or fourth time he gives the same presentation, he'll record it, run it through one of the transcription services that are so prevalent nowadays, and that's his book. So an hour, 2 hour presentation that he gives ends up going into the book. He says he waits till the fourth time so he has his presentation down and things work well. But I think you're right. There's lots of time savers, lots of ways to, I guess I'll use the word hack. I don't usually like that word, but to hack the process. But anyway, last question for you. What's coming up next besides the book, of course, but what's next for you?
Well, right now we're giving a lot of thought of where the opportunities are going to be. So, look, we've all seen an unprecedented hike in interest rates. It's going to cause a lot of challenges, but I do believe where there are challenges, there's opportunities. Mm-hmm. So we're really thinking hard about where those opportunities are going to be, not only on the brokerage side, but also as an investor, right? Yep. And one of the biggest topics out there that I'm sure you all have heard a lot about is, what happens with these defunct Class B, C office buildings. Mm-hmm. There's in New York, there's 20% availability for office space. That's 100 million square feet, 100 million square feet of available office space, right? My belief with hybrid and the slow return to office is its amount is only going to go up. So the question is, what do you do with it? Meanwhile, we have a housing shortage. Mm-hmm. So how do we convert office to residential? Easier said than done. There's zoning considerations. There are questions about, does the floor layout make sense? Mm-hmm. Are there going to be tax abatements? But where there are challenges, there will be opportunities. So thinking about, also a lot of owners out there, they're going to have debt coming due. Their bank's going to say, look, you can refinance, but you got to pay down your mortgage, $5-10 million, whatever it is. And some of these owners are not going to have the ability, the wherewithal to do it. So those could be owners who need to sell. Those could be recap opportunities where someone who's got fresh capital can come to the table and say, look, why don't we partner on this together? And I can help you. So those are the kind of things I'm always, that's the old Wayne Gretzky, skate to where the puck is going. Really think about where are we headed and how do you get in front of those opportunities? Yeah,
I love it. And you're absolutely right. I've talked to a couple people. You don't hear the word cash in refinance very often, but
right.
We're in a market where
we hear a lot more of that.
You're gonna be hearing that word a lot more, cash in refinances. Well, appreciate you, and we're gonna switch gears and bring Martha on for a bit. So Martha, how you doing today?
Doing wonderful.
Awesome. Well, welcome back.
It's so fun to be here again. So exciting to hear James' story and have a crack at him.
Awesome. Well, fun to hear your story again too. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I fell into real estate completely by accident, never intended to. My husband and I raised 3 daughters in Northern California, and we bought a house just to get a tax deduction, purchased at $150,000, I think, in 95, and now it's almost at $1 million, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And so having that happen to me, was more powerful than a whole series of seminars. Like, this stuff is really valuable. Yeah. And then so we purchased a restaurant supply business, and we ran the restaurant supply business for about 20 years. And when we hit upon some really hard times, it's funny how it happened. It's related to my why, because I was down to very low finances, but I really wanted to tithe. I wanted to be able to give 10% of my money away. And I was down to the point where it was literally my restaurant and theater money. If I had given the 10%, I wouldn't have had any discretionary income left, but I just decided to do it anyways. And as soon as I did that, I stumbled into this opportunity to rent micro warehouse spaces in our little warehouse. And we started renting 100 square feet, 200 square feet to contractors on a month-to-month, like little Airbnb at 4 times the going rate of real estate, of a warehouse space. And I ended up with 8 to 10 different little tenants in my little warehouse. It became a multi-tenant warehouse. And even just recently, one of my spaces became available and I posted it on Craigslist, and I had a tenant signed. I raised the rent, signed a new tenant in less than 24 hours. It's so hot. It's such a hot thing. So I couldn't recreate it though, because in order to do space that wasn't in my own warehouse, I would have had to have a real estate license. The 1 month where I actually did give away the 10%, which was my discretionary income, my income tripled that month based on the warehouse rental. So that's why I feel it was a sort of a divine inspiration how that came about.
Nice how that works. Yeah. I've seen it work with a lot of people like that too. So yeah.
When you give, when it hurts and something really miraculous happens. So I had the opportunity to fund drill wells in India. I've had the opportunity to establish medical clinics where they don't have any medical supplies at all, buy equipment for that. And these are the things that really moved the needle for me. We sold the restaurant supply business earlier this year as I become 60 and my daughter had a baby, and I wanted to be able to spend time with the child. But I also wanted to give more and do something with this sort of warehouse multi-tenant process that I came up with. So I decided I needed to figure out how to purchase apartment complexes with other people's money. I'm involved in a mentorship program and building up a brand and learning as much as I can, and networking and trying to figure out how to ask people for money, which is actually not the right way to put it, how to offer marvelous opportunities to people. And just trying to get the hang of that and trying to figure out how to land my first GP opportunity.
Awesome. Yeah. A lot of it is in kind of how you phrase things. I mean, if you're asking people for money, that's one thing. If you're providing them an opportunity, you can get a better traction. But so question that I just realized I missed this with James. So James, we'll come back and ask you this question next. But Martha, what's your big burning why?
As I mentioned, I really love the opportunity to share money with projects that help people that are in impossible situations. I also really love to fund the evangelism of the gospel of Jesus Christ. These are things that just really, I just get so excited about it. And in tithing, I had read that there are some historical people, including Colgate, by the way, who I believe actually reverse tithed. That is to say, he lived on the 10% and he donated 90% of his income. And that idea tantalizes me. I want to do that. I need to make a lot more money in order to do that. And I just want to give away as much as I can. My 3 daughters are grown up. They're fine. I'm not trying to, raise money to spend time with my family or whatever. Although, when I come into some money, I like to set up a fund that would provide for generational annual family reunions, set up a trust fund so that everybody in the family would pay for all their flights and vacations to meet once a year. So that's something that I would like to do for my family. Other than that, my kids are pretty well set.
Yeah, I heard somebody talk about that a couple months ago. Actually, it's been a while now. But I think that's a great idea too. And James, looping back to you, I missed that question for you for some reason, but what's your why?
Well, I just love what I do on a day-to-day basis. It's now been 25 years, and this is the kind of business where every single day you're learning something new. And it's just, that's what makes the job so interesting. If I was just doing the same thing over and over and over, I'm sure I would have moved on. But you meet so many interesting people in this business. And certainly as a broker, dealing with private individuals, big REITs, foreign investors, lenders, but then also learning about communities, different business plans, different nuances on how to operate properties. That's just super interesting to me. I really love also is just giving back and teaching. So I also do a lot of guest lecturing. I used to be an adjunct professor at NYU, but I've guest lectured at Columbia, Wharton. And I just love giving back. I mean, when I got into the business, people were so generous with their time, a lot of mentors out there. And so this is kind of my part. If I can help introduce people to this incredible business so they can become successful and independent, that would really, I think, be my why.
I love it. The giving back, hence the book and everything else. And I think a lot of podcasters are into that too, just, straight giving back, helping other people. And I agree, it's a lot of fun doing what we do too. I've never brokered anything, but that sounds fun to me. Anyway, coming to my favorite part of the podcast where I say, Martha, we got James on the line. What do you want to ask him?
Well, James, you touched upon this a little bit, and you talked about how when there's challenges, there's opportunities. You've been through 2008, you've been through COVID, and now we're into this unprecedented time. Instead of a prescription for what you did in each time, how do we think about these kinds of things as they come upon us?
Martha, that's an incredible question. And I am lucky now that I've seen some of these cycles, and I just talked about some of the mentorship that I had. So at the time, I had never seen anything like 2008, 2009, the great financial crisis. But the founders of my company were around back in the RTC days, 1991, 92, savings and loan crisis. I mean, those were really, really tough years. I think it is important to always have that glasses half full mindset where things are challenging, but those times are really times when you can rebuild, create that foundation, and come out of them stronger. Because a lot of the competition, a lot of people out there, either they'll be on the sidelines or they'll just get out of the business entirely. And I think what's really interesting about these down markets, and on my podcast, I interviewed a ton of legends in the business. I interviewed Don Peebles, who's a self-made billionaire. Mm-hmm. And he said, look, the best opportunities I ever bought were in these down markets because no one else was looking. And you could call it the Warren Buffett school of investing. When people are fearful, be greedy. But I think what he's really saying is that these uncertain times, these are the opportunities to jump in because, again, a lot of the interest, a lot of the buyers are just going to be on the sidelines. Mm-hmm. You know, when there's uncertainty, most people, their default is, okay, I'll sit this one out, right? And what I'm trying to say, Martha, is this is like the time you need to double down. Because if you're out there looking and you're making the calls, you're doing the outreach, you're going to have a lot less competition. That's for sure.
Yeah. I got my investing start. I bought right before the crash, my first investment property. And that was a learning experience by itself. But I bought my second one right after the crash. And my biggest regret was I only bought one property in 2009. I wish I would have bought, everything I could get my hands on because, yeah, it does bring a lot of opportunities. And hopefully this is no different.
Yeah, I love that. So building on that, what have you shifted in recently? And is there anything fun and interesting that you did different during COVID other than starting your podcast?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was the podcast, but this whole advent of, digital marketing. When I started in the business, I mean, I can now say I didn't even have a cell phone when I got into the business. We used to use fax machines. I didn't have email. Yes. And now it's really, really evolved. The fact that we can have this conversation yes. and thousands of people are going to hear this, like, that's amazing. Yeah. And who knows, the context where, we talk about putting it out there, trying to be helpful. And this isn't why we're doing it, for things to come back to us. But you never know, again, who's listening, who might have an opportunity for you or might want to invest with you. And so I really think leveraging all these platforms today, and I'm very big on social media as well. LinkedIn is an incredibly powerful tool, probably the most powerful for what I'm doing. But I post stuff on LinkedIn. I'm starting to get more involved in Twitter. Not because Musk took over, but just because there's a lot of investors there now. I even tried out one of the recent Twitter spaces where I was on a panel. Mm-hmm. Just fascinating to me that you can jump on, have a live conversation, and there could be hundreds of people in the audience who can join in and discuss. So there's just so many opportunities today to get a much greater reach. Whereas when I started my career, it was very much just, one-on-one picking up the phone. Now, that being said, I still believe there's no substitute for that. Okay. So this digital marketing, your presence, the ability to reach a larger audience, that's a great place to start. But if you can't then narrow that down and convert that into one-on-one conversations and take those offline, you're not going to see the full benefit.
I recently made a switch on what I do on LinkedIn. And most people who listen to the podcast know that I post on LinkedIn a lot, but I started putting calls to action. Very simple. On every time I talk about real estate investing, I put a call to action. Let's set up a call. And just putting that one line into my posts has done, I mean, exactly what James is talking about. You need to get those one-on-one engagements, but just putting that one line in, hey, if you're interested, let's set up a call, has, probably tripled the amount of calls I get from what I do on LinkedIn itself. But yeah, just anyway, wanted to add that into what James said. But yeah, LinkedIn's a great place. I haven't done much with Twitter yet. Curious to see how it works for you, James, and maybe I'll give you a follow to see what you're doing.
Absolutely.
And-
James Nelson at NYC. And the big thing about Twitter is really about the engagement. So, it's kind of putting great content out there. And that's really at the root of what I'm doing. It's not promotional stuff. It's really hopefully valuable content. So my clients, investors, I'm putting information out there. Again, putting myself in the client's shoes, what would they want to hear? And so that's on Twitter. And I kind of worked on this over the weekend, putting together great sound bites, content that we can put out there to kind of spark some dialogue.
Well, James, you have quite the empire. How would a starting person like me start to engage in social media to get the word out?
So another thing I was working on over this weekend was writing an article on team building. And I'm also a huge believer in building a team, and it's never too early to start. And I said, even starting with an intern, if you're in the Bay Area, I mean, there's so many talented kids out there in college who they've got 10, 20 hours a week that they want to devote. And Martha, you might not know anything about social media or how to get started. Those college students, most of them, they live it, they know how to do it. And then the exchange is, well, hey, I can teach you the business. I can teach you what I'm doing. So I would start there, and you'll see that those interns, and as you do more business, the appeal is maybe at some point they can turn into a full-time hire. But I've got a team of close to 36 people here. I have a full-time marketing person on staff. I outsource my social media with an agency. You don't have to take it to the same level of what I'm doing, but to start, it's just, you do want to be authentic. I do come up with my own content. So it's not like I have an agency writing all my stuff. They just know how to post it and where to put it and make sure that it gets the most mileage. But start by, for Brian and myself, we've got a podcast. I've got a white paper. I mean, it's putting good content out there that then you can share with an audience.
Yeah. That's the key, the good content. You can have the promotions, the promoters, the specialists, and everything else, but the key is just the good content. If you start putting good content out there, and I've seen a lot of people put percentages out there, but the majority of your content should aim to educate people and educate them on what multifamily is, what it can do for them, how it can help them. And that's a great start. And interesting that he said intern. I did have somebody reach out to me from a college asking for an internship, and it was a marketing related internship, and it ended up being something that worked out pretty well. After the internship, keep him on for several months, paying him to do it. But yeah, the finding people who can help you out, I think, is a really, really good way to do that. And there's also, virtual assistants. Go on Fiverr or find one of the virtual assistants places if you need the help posting and everything else. But lots of resources.
What do you think a starting GP does not know but needs to know about how to talk to a broker?
Oh, I love that question.
Yeah.
The majority of transactions happen with a broker, even whether it's on or off market. A broker relationship, I think a lot of investors think of it as a one-way street, right? Where it's just, hey, I'm going to wait for my broker to call me up. Of course, they're going to call me when they have a great deal. You really need to create that relationship, and it's got to be a two-way street. And just like you expect your broker to reach out, you need to check in with them. And I used to have one investor who said, James, I'm going to stop by your office once a month. I hope it's not a burden on you. And I just want to catch up and let's just talk about what's going on. Inevitably, we'd go through my deal sheet. We'd go through 2 or 3 dozen deals. And then I'd say, you know what, Mike, actually, there's one other thing I'm working on. And oh, by the way, how about this or that? And most investors do not do that. Most investors sit back. They wait for the deals to come to them, cultivate the relationship, call the broker. And I would even say help the brokers out. I mean, if there's an opportunity that you're passing on that's off market, you're calling the broker and saying, hey, just by the way, this isn't for me, but you might want to call this owner. They got to sell. Maybe it's an opportunity for you. I mean, now you're really creating some goodwill where that broker says, hey, I'm going to look out for Martha. I'm going to really find her something good. So I would just say cultivate those relationships. It's a two-way street.
Yeah, I like that. With a lot of things, it's a squeaky wheel that gets the grease. It's a cliche for a reason. I think it's absolutely true. And sometimes a squeaky wheel has a negative connotation, but take the negative connotation out of that squeaky wheel. If you're cultivating that relationship and you're like clockwork with the phone calls or dropping by the office once a month, like James just mentioned, when they have deals, you're going to be top of mind.
Top of mind.
Yeah, if you're top of mind, you're going to be on that first series of phone calls. And James, I'm assuming when you get a deal across your desk as a broker, you probably have that first series of phone calls. You're like, okay, I know 5 or 6 guys that might be interested in that. Is that typically how you do it?
Yeah, I mean, look, we blast our listings out, but there's no doubt, you want to get one of those early calls where, hey, this is coming out, give you a head start on it. And look, there are opportunities where you can get a preamp. So, you get that early call, you make a quick offer. Look, maybe it doesn't even hit the market.
Absolutely. Well, cool. We're about out of time. So one last question for each of you. And James, you get to go first. How can listeners learn more about you?
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. And jamesnelson.com. That's where you can find my podcast, where you can find my white papers, video series, and information on how to pre-order my book. Of course, you can also just go to Amazon for that. But yeah, jamesnelson.com. It's easy. Everything is there to help give you the inside edge to real estate investing.
All right. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes, jamesnelson.com. Super easy. His first name, his last name, add a .com on the end. I wish brianbriscoe.com weren't taken already. There's not a website there, but
I had to pay for mine.
Yeah, maybe I'll find a broker and go find how much it's going to cost to get my name. All right, Martha, same question for you. How can listeners learn more about you?
Yes, I am Pavilion Multifamily. Pavilion, like a great big tent, enough room for everyone to fit under. PavilionMultifamily.com, and also the same handle on Instagram. And I am on LinkedIn as Martha Sandino.
All right, awesome. We'll put links to those in the show notes as well. So thanks very much to both of you again for coming on the show today. I had a great time and wish you guys both the best of luck and happy holidays.
Hey, if you like that episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button. But more importantly, if you haven't joined our multifamily educational community, the Tribe of Titans yet, you are missing out. So get yourself 30 days free by clicking the link below in the description or go to thetribeoftitans.info and we'll see you there.